The purpose of this video is to walk you through the research translation assignment this week. And this is a skill that you can use when you are reading any kind of source whose content might be elevated, a source that uses technical jargon, or a source that is just a little bit outside your scope of knowledge, but something that you have to read or you are interested in reading. So the first part of this assignment is to access the article that we're going to be using, and that's capturing and co-creating student experiences in social media, a social identity theory perspective. For our purposes this week, I only want you to read just the introduction, and that's about the first 5 paragraphs. In this document, I've highlighted those paragraphs just so you know that you can stop before you get to the literature review. Of course, if you're reading sources for another purpose, then you might have to read the source in its entirety. The first thing that you should do is do a really quick preview read. When you preview read, I just want you to read quickly through the content, trying to understand it, but not spending too much extra time to pause and nitpick the concepts in every single sentence. Your goal is really just foundational baseline knowledge, especially in an introductory section where the information is its least technical. So just read through these first 5 paragraphs and then write a summary of what you think this is about. Even if it's not 100% perfect, just what did you get from reading this content? Okay. After that, I want you to kind of go back through and take a look at the specific sentences themselves and find one that's a little bit tricky for you. Maybe when you were reading it, you thought, what? I have no idea what that means. And maybe you continued to read, or you skipped the sentence entirely because there was a bit too much going on in it. Find a sentence like that, one that just kind of you stumble through, and after you're done reading it, you're not really sure what it said. So that's picking a tricky sentence. You can quote it using MLA format for this assignment. If you want to practice that skill, we'll get to that in a couple of weeks. And now I want you to work through the translation process. So I'm going to imagine that I have selected this sentence from the introduction in order to translate. So when I read it, it's a pretty lengthy sentence. There's a lot going on. It's technically 2 sentences, but I felt that was necessary just from understanding the context. I'm going to focus my research translation on the second sentence. So before I really get into the process, I am going to delete the in-text citations that I see that this author has put in the sentence, just because that's going to make the translating process a little bit easier. It will help me better see the sentence in its entirety, and it also just visually takes away some of that clutter so that my brain isn't overwhelmed when I look at the sentence. Okay, so now I'm just going to walk through step by step this process. So the first thing I'm going to do is define any words that I don't know or any words that I don't have context for. For this sentence, after I slowed down and focused on it, I realized that the only words I really didn't understand was this acronym SIT. Now I had read the introduction, but the SIT acronym wasn't encoded deeply in my mind to where when I read the phrase "sit explains how," that I knew exactly what sit was. So instead of going to a dictionary, which probably wouldn't have helped me, I sifted back through the paragraphs before this sentence, and I found that right around here, the author explains what SIT, the acronym, is referring to, social identity theory. And if I needed to better understand social identity theory, then I could have just continued to read this other part of the introduction. So what you're going to do next, once you've found the words you are kind of confused on, or maybe you don't have the proper definition for or context of, if you can't define 100% what the word means, but even if you kind of know what it means, but you can't nail down a written definition, then I would definitely encourage you to look it up. Okay, so once you've got your definitions, you've written them down, you just want to pop them into that original sentence so that you can replace what you didn't know with what you do know. So for me, this would just look like social identity theory explains how, and then the rest of the sentence. So here's the original sentence. Here are my definitions. I only needed one, you might need more. And here's my sentence with the plugged in definitions. From there, I want you to chunk the sentence into manageable phrases. So I'm going to start with the first sentence all on its own. And then I'm going to break this into, for me, logical sections. I'm looking for places where the idea changes. Oftentimes, the best way to chunk it is at its conjunctions or at its punctuation, like its internal punctuation, like commas or maybe semicolons. So I'm going to move to, however, despite the theory informing relationship marketing success. And again, for me, the issue with this sentence isn't necessarily that I don't understand the individual words. It's that all these words stacked on top of each other aren't familiar patterns of writing and speech. And so when they're written in this way, with this complicated sentence structure, I'm confused when I read this sentence. So I'm going to chunk out and potentially impacting on the process through which customer experiences unfold. And then I am going to chunk out its role in social media marketing is largely underexplored. So for me, I've got 4 sentence chunks. I've got the first sentence and then 3 parts of that second sentence. So once you've chunked out the sentences into parts, then you want to paraphrase each part. So below your chunks, just turn those into paraphrases. Here's what this might look like. Below each original chunk of the sentence, I've written my own paraphrases. So here's what I come up with then for each chunk of these 2 sentences. So first, social identity theory can help us understand how buyers and sellers work together. And while this theory has helped us understand how selling products with the consumer in mind works well, and while this theory has probably changed the way businesses engage buyers, we don't really know much about how this theory works when it's applied to selling that happens via social media. Okay, so this is just demonstrating the process of chunking that tricky sentence into manageable parts, and then below each manageable part, understanding what does just that part in the sentence mean, and can you write that in your own words? And that's what I've done here with the original sentence and my paraphrase in bullets below it. To really see the full scope of now your new understanding, I want you to put all of these paraphrased chunks together into one sentence, or if you're like me, I'm working with 2 sentences so that I can really understand this concept. And so this is what I've got. SIT can help us understand how buyers and sellers work together. While this theory has helped us understand how selling products with the consumer in mind works well, and while this theory has probably changed the way businesses engage buyers, we don't really know much about how this theory works when it's applied to selling that happens via social media. Okay, so that's everything that I just read before in its chunks, but I've put it all together. It still feels a little bit chunky. It still feels a little bit like an overwhelming sentence, but I now know how I would phrase this sentence if I were writing it with my own words. So the one more thing that I'm going to do is just kind of clean up my paraphrase so that if I came across my own sentence and I were reading it, I would even further better understand what these 2 sentences are about. So here's what my cleaned up final paraphrase says. Social identity theory can help us understand how buying and selling is a relationship. It has helped us understand why selling with the consumer in mind has been successful, and it has helped us change the way businesses communicate with their consumers. But what we don't know much about regarding this theory is how it works when it's applied to selling products and services via social media. So now, even though I've really just kind of re-explained the original sentence, I've paraphrased it, because I've put it into my own words, because I've internalized it, even just because I've gone through this process, I better understand the sentence and now the context of the introduction. And I could plug this final paraphrase back into that paragraph where I got the original sentence from, and I would probably even better understand the entire paragraph and the entire introduction, and that might even help me better understand the rest of the article if I were going to continue to read it. So when you are finished with this part, there's one more thing that I want you to do. I want you to reflect on this process. I want to know specifically, what was the most challenging aspect? Why do you think that is? For me, it's always the idea that I feel like I already know the words, and I get a little bit uncertain about why would I go through this process if I kind of already know what the words mean. But every time I do and I come out on the other side, I always realize I understand the content even better because I did this research translation. So hopefully this is a skill that you can use as you are moving forward with research in this class and in other classes. But if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.